So we're looking at the Jan-Feb 2020 paper. And looking at that paper, for question number 1, they gave us that information. For question number 1, they gave us that information. So here they say the board is reviewing the strategy of the enterprise and has requested you to provide insight on how the enterprise can use external shocks as opportunities for innovation. So where this question is coming from, it's coming from Unit 2.7, or on what we discussed in Unit 2.7. And if you check on Unit 2.7, what we discussed on Unit 2.7, we look at beyond risk mitigation, where we look at enhancing corporate innovation with scenario planning. And under that unit, they say scenario planning can aid firms by guiding their corporate innovation capabilities to create a novel strategic improvements. For example, scenario planning that includes exogenous shocks can help managers acquire the knowledge necessary to respond effectively to major unexpected negative events. So here they say some firms increase their ability to maintain operations in the face of severe events in the competitive environment, while others learn to turn challenges from exogenous shocks into the source of competitive advantage as well. So that's the idea behind this particular question, is that you want to make sure that you are able to, it's not enough to just mitigate the effects of exogenous shocks. You also need to be able to look for potential advantages that you can also create for the firm as well. So under this, when they talk about exogenous shocks, they say the context in which most firms operate has become increasingly dynamic, uncertain, and unpredictable. So dynamic conditions require firms to adapt their strategy, formulation, and implementation actions to realign the firm in a way that maximizes its value creation potential. So in addition to the traditional environmental threats, such as competitors' actions, customers' changing demands, suppliers' needs and abilities to fulfill the firm's needs, and various other stakeholders' concerns, firms also encounter challenges posed by exogenous shocks. So unpredictable supply chain interruption, abnormal weather events, major global economic disruptions, cybersecurity failures, and the risk of physical attacks on high-profile company assets are only a few examples of exogenous shocks that can threaten a firm. So the potential threat to business imposed by exogenous shocks requires increased vigilance by managers seeking to protect their firms. So when considering the challenges of conducting business in an increasingly competitive environment, the impact of exogenous shocks is on business strategy and possible responses to those threats have received growing attention. So those are some of the things that you need to be able to discuss as well. So please go over this article. To see exactly what the article discusses when it comes to the effects of what exogenous shocks. Check out the main points, and also look at the effects of what we have seen so far when it comes to the pandemic as well, and how you can also be able to say, if you are given this question again, you can be able to address this question from a more practical perspective as well. So you see that under this section, they also discuss scenario planning as well. And then after that, they also discuss corporate innovation, where you're now looking to see exactly how do corporates also ensure that they're able to accurately respond to the effects of those exogenous shocks in their value creation pursuit as well. Then, so go over this article again. I'm sure we've gone over this article when we've discussed. I remember in the class that we went over this article, we also discussed potential pointers that you can also be able to use so that you're able to answer your question, the question effectively as well. So ideally, on the memo, or ideally—
Good morning, Reynolds.
Yes.
Good morning. Where can we get the article? Are you going to repost it?
Okay. Have you been using articles so far? Because remember, your study guide asked you to go through the articles as well.
Okay, so am I going to find it in my study guide, or would you post it?
Remember, when you go over this study guide, every study unit, there are some, they also give you articles that you need to go through. Please contact me after the class. Just follow up with me. Follow up with me after the class on WhatsApp. All right. So, how you would ideally answer this question? Probably you can consider putting in such a way that, because I remember this question, the lecturer also asked this question in, I think it was in the assignment or something. So there's some pointers that he also alluded to that can be added on as well. So here they say, the context in which most firms operate is becoming increasingly dynamic, uncertain, and unpredictable. So dynamic conditions require firms to adapt their strategy formulation and implementation actions to realign the firm in a way that maximizes its value creation potential. Remember, when you are answering these questions, when you look at risk financing, always ask yourself that whatever you're trying to address, at the end of the day, you are also trying to meet the goal of the firm. And the goal of the firm is to maximize shareholders' wealth. So which means in that pursuit of maximizing shareholders' wealth, depending on exactly the different challenges that the firm is going to be meeting as well, you also have to make sure that you are however you answer the question, you always have to go back to say, overall, this is how we are going to be able, this is how you would be able to maximize the value of the firm as well. So which means here they say, in addition to traditional environmental threats, such as competitors' actions, customers' changing demands, suppliers' needs and abilities to fulfill the firm's needs, the various other stakeholders' concerns, firms also encounter challenges posed by exogenous shocks. So unpredictable supply chain interruption, abnormal weather events, major global economic disruptions, cybersecurity failures, and the risk of physical attacks on high-profile company assets are only a few examples of exogenous shocks that can threaten the firm. So the potential threat to business imposed by exogenous shocks requires increased vigilance by managers seeking to protect their firms. So when considering the challenges of conducting business in an increasingly competitive environment, the impact of exogenous shocks on business strategy and possible responses to those threats have received growing attention. So this would seem to indicate that the business press recognizes the impact of such shocks can have on the business environment generally or individually, from firms specifically if they are targeted or are the only firm in their industry to be affected as well. So there are growing recognition of importance of establishing a response to incidents of exogenous shocks. So many business and educational campuses are developing and practicing crisis management plans to guide responses during emergency situations such as weather events, physical confrontations, and crimes occurring on or near the campus. So the importance of such plans can be evidenced by the failure to control rioters who stormed the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. So when firms assess their external environment to consider new markets or reevaluate existing ones, the threat of exogenous shocks should be a distinct consideration. So threats to firm property and personnel are of primary concern to top managers. So yet research has shown that exogenous shocks can negatively affect the firm, possibly leading to reduced stock price along with other effects of non-employee stakeholders. So employees, investors, and other stakeholders may view any significant business disruptions as a sign of weakness within the company that in turn can produce negative cash flows. So despite the potential harm, however, not all organizations prepare for external shocks. It was found that fewer than 50% of the Fortune 500 corporations had implemented plans to react to or protect their organizations from terrorist attacks, and the plans that were in place dealt mainly with weapons training and actions to avoid the kidnapping of employees as response to mitigation and response, as opposed to mitigation and response. So a more recent McKinsey quarterly survey indicates that a majority of executives do not believe their companies have adequately addressed or prepared for the multitude of exogenous factors that can cause a substantial disruption in their business. So this point is echoed in the 2008 Continuing Insights or KPMG Business Continuity Management Benchmark Survey. Respondents to the survey note that while 67% of firms indicate their business continuity program is well integrated with their crisis management program, only 36% suggest that they were integrated with their strategic planning activities. So meanwhile, other firms choose to respond yes, fail to adjust effectively, thereby suffering consequences. Then, thus, exogenous shocks have become a salient concern for firms, and learning how to respond to those shocks is of prime importance for managers. So businesses which proactively build a culture of resilience, defined herein as the ability to absorb and effectively respond to the exogenous shocks into their organization, were better able to react to and recover from the terrorist attacks in 9/11. For example, Marsh and Lehman companies had a working disaster recovery and a business continuity plan in place prior to the 2001. When executives realized that the threat, they were enacted the plan. Marsh, though losing 295 employees that day, quickly recovered its business operations while preparing and implementing a health and welfare response to its egregious loss of human life. So the chairman articulated the difficulty of recovering business operations while at the same time dealing with the catastrophic loss of our colleagues. It goes without saying that preparedness, good crisis management, is essential to being able to manage through a disaster. So it very much mattered that we had those plans in place. So in events of 2020 illustrate the importance of investigating the mechanisms through which exogenous shocks can impact society, how they cross borders and their consequence for businesses as well. So exogenous shocks do, however, also have some positive effects. They create incentives and opportunities for entrepreneurial innovation. So industries that were already struggling, such as brick and mortar retail, face accelerated replacement by disruptive incumbents, while new ways of operating, ranging from flexible work arrangements to online service delivery, are experimented on as well. And they have also, so we have also seen that businesses that also went the online route, they also excelled during the pandemic period as well. As you can see from the examples of, like, for example, companies like Amazon that really excelled during the pandemic as well. So here they also say, in contrast, the ongoing crisis in the world's financial markets illustrates the harsh realities that the firms can encounter due to lack of planning. So numerous high-profile financial service companies like Merrill and Lynch and Lehman Brothers that were rocked by exogenous shocks on the Wall Street during 2008 recession had to face competitive reality, forcing these firms to change rapidly and search for effective methods of dealing with shocks to the housing and credit markets. So Fannie Mae and the largest mortgage buyer in America, and Freddie Mac, the second largest mortgage company, were both taken over by the government in 2008 after suffering a devastating financial losses. So their market capitalization dropped by approximately 98% in 1 year period, leading to their collapse. So these firms were unable to effectively respond to the exogenous shock caused by a significant slowdown in the US housing market and consequent freezing of credit markets as well. Then they say scenario and contingency planning is a key tool used by firms and governments alike to build organizational resilience. So organizations that utilize scenario or contingency planning to explore their exposure to risk in times of exogenous shocks may be better able to formulate entrepreneurial responses to such shocks. So while some firms have been chosen strategies to react to exogenous events. Others have pursued a more proactive entrepreneurial posture. And so in the following section, we so that's basically what they're trying to. So these are some of the points that you can also put in as well. So remember, with the you can also, as part of the points that you can also be able to discuss, you can also discuss the riots that we also experienced this year to say, so how would companies ideally be able to actually recover from such such effects effects as well on the overall organization as well. Then you can also put in issues that we are currently experiencing, like for example, this issue of the supply chain backlog that we're experiencing across the world. And you can also use examples of companies like Amazon on exactly how they were able to prepare themselves and find ways of actually bypassing the supply chain blockages that we're also experiencing across the world as well. So you can also use these examples as part of the ways that you can also say, how can a particular organization can be able to react to such exogenous shocks, and also how they can be able to mitigate that so that they're able to create a competitive advantage overall. Because remember, at the end of the day, the idea is you always have to make sure that you now take the effects of the exogenous shocks and also try to create your own competitive advantages as well, so that you're able to actually excel during the periods of such negative effects of exogenous shocks as well. So remember, these points that we discussed here, it's more or less the things that we already highlighted in the textbook as well. So which means we now have to look at a more recent events that have happened, and there's quite a lot of examples that you can also be able to look at. And remember, this particular question, wouldn't be surprised if this question comes again in your 2022 exam, mainly because if you look at the way things have been evolving, you can see as well that the issue of exogenous shocks, especially when it comes to the effect of the pandemic as well, is still very relevant, and it's still something that is very practical and exactly. So the lecturer I would say, is likely to ask such a question again, so that they can be able to test to see exactly how are you going to be able to address such issues that we're also facing now when it comes to the effect of the pandemic. So are there any questions, any other points that you might want to add when it comes to especially when it comes to the effect of the pandemic as well?
Do you think rhinos also the July riots are relevant to this question when answering?
Very, 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 very relevant. Very, very relevant. Because remember, the riots, when it comes to the business organizations, the effects of the riots were outside the control of the business organizations as well. It's something that happened to them. So I would say those are very, 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 very relevant as well. So you can now be able to look at it comprehensively to say, so ideally, how do business organizations be able to prepare themselves for such a thing? And also, how are they going to be going into the future as well? What would be ideal for them, or how can they be able to prepare for themselves going into the future if anything like this ever happens again as well? So the July riots, very, very, very important. And it's very, very relevant when it comes to the effects, because that's a typical exogenous shocks too, if you look at it as well. Because remember, it was beyond the internal controls of the organizations.
Thanks so much.
All right. So please read up as well a little bit more when it comes to the supply chain backlogs that we are experiencing across the world, and read up as well when it comes to the costs of remember, the fuel costs have been increasing so far as well, if you look at it, because if the cartels, the fuel cartels, the oil cartels has been, because they want to recover their profits of what happened during the pandemic, they are constantly increasing the prices. So it's something that is beyond the control of other organizations that are, especially when you look at organizations that are in, for example, trucking business or anything that has to be moving goods across as well. Any other questions?
So Rhinos, can you put the VUCA word into this in a way, in terms of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, to answer the question?
Yes, you can be able to, you would be able to allude to that, because remember, at the end of the day, when you look at the VUCA acronym, it's all to do with the ever-changing environment that we're basically experiencing across the world as well. So it would be relevant to actually highlight that as well. So remember, in answering this question, yes, we have been given examples, but if you look at the examples that were given in the study guide, it's mostly to do from an American perspective as well. So I would advise you strongly to think about this, think about potentially, if you're asked this question in the January 2022 exam, what other examples from a South African perspective would you be able to utilize as well? Because remember, if you're able to utilize more examples from a South African perspective, it shows that you're able to actually understand practically how this actually relates to the organizations as well, from a local perspective. Are there any other questions? So please, this question, after class, go over this question again, jot down, if potentially you're asked this question in the exam, jot down the points that you can also add on to this particular question as well. I will share the memo with you, but please jot down other things that you can also potentially add on to the exam, so that if this question is ever asked in the exam, you've already prepared yourself, and you already have an arsenal of things that you can also potentially add to add more meat to the answer as well, so that you're able to demonstrate to the lecturer that even from a practical perspective, you do understand the whole concept of exogenous shocks and exactly how you can be able to mitigate and also create a competitive advantage for the organization as well. Can you move on to question?
Can you just explain the exogenous shocks again, like just the definition and what they really are?
If you check in the study guide on unit 2.7, by definition, we would say exogenous shocks are unexpected events that come from outside the economic system, and they affect the course of the economic system. So these, for example, can be events such as natural disasters, terror attacks, changes in government policy, or political events as well. So that's basically how you would define exogenous shocks. If you check in the study guide, so that's basically how you would define exogenous shocks. So the whole idea behind the exogenous shocks is that these events that come from outside the control of the business organization. If you look at it from a business organization perspective, these are events that affect the business organization, but they come from outside the control of the business organization. So which means these are events that the business organization cannot be able to control on whether they happen or they don't happen. So the only thing that the business organization can be able to do is to prepare themselves that if they do happen, how are they able to mitigate the negative effects of those exogenous shocks as well. And now they are basically saying that you need to go beyond just mitigating exogenous shocks. You also need to go beyond that and try to see exactly how are you as a manager able to create a competitive advantage for the organization as well. Are we on the same page?
Yes, thank you.
All right. Are there any other questions?
Hi, Rhinos.
Hello?
If I may ask, when it comes to answering the question in the exam, for instance, if the same question comes like this, can I copy the same response and paste it as per the solution, or I'll have to reword it, although the solution was given by the lecturer for the previous question paper?
My advice would be try to avoid finding yourself in the gray areas. I still remember accounting students, the honors, I can't remember which stage, the level it was. They were asked a question in the exam that was coming from an assignment question. So they just simply copied and pasted it, and then for their online exam. And they were caught out on issues of plagiarism, although they managed to eventually try to overturn the situation. I would say try as much as possible to avoid getting caught in the gray areas as well. So try avoid copying and pasting, and try avoid getting caught in the gray areas, because yeah, it becomes a lot of work for you to now try to recover from that as well. Because yeah, you know, UNISA systems, it takes time for you to be able to now, if it so happens, it might take time now for you to be able to actually overturn that as well. So try as much as possible to avoid getting caught in the gray areas. And how you can do that is to try and anticipate that if this question comes, what else can I be able to add as an individual onto this particular question, so that I know that I already have an arsenal of points that I can also add on and avoid this whole issue of plagiarism as well.
Noted, Rhinos. Thank you.
All right. So prepare yourself in advance, so that if the question ever comes in the exam, it's not necessarily a matter of copying and pasting. You already know exactly what else you can be able to add on that is more recent to our, so you don't want to be caught up in this whole issue of plagiarism as well.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Are there any other questions? All right. Let's look at question 2. So question 2, they say, explain how the enterprise can use and apply an efficient frontier to risk-taking to develop a risk portfolio view when developing risk appetite and risk tolerance statements as well. Then they also say, how will the risk appetite of the enterprise influence risk financing decisions? And then they say, use diagrams to illustrate the concept as well, right? So looking at this, if you ideally, how you would answer this is if you check on unit if you check on unit 9.3, the article for unit 9.3, so if you check on the article for unit 9.3, this is where they discuss the diagrams that this is where they discuss the efficient frontier. And if you on the article for unit 9.3, they give us the efficient frontier. And if you look at the efficient frontier, they discuss it. They discuss the efficient frontier where they say, if you look, the efficient frontier basically shows you the relationship between the returns and the risk as measured by standard deviation. So in this case, it's also showing you the relationship between risk and return, where we see that the lower the risk, the lower the expected return, and the higher the risk, the higher the expected return as well. As you can see, low risk, low return section is found here. Then the medium risk, medium return, then high risk, high return is found there as well. So which means in this case, when you look at the efficient frontier, ideally you want your portfolio to be found along the efficient frontier, because if it's found along the efficient frontier, this is where you are able to maximize your return for a given level of risk, and this is where you are able to minimize your risk for a given level of return. So which means if your current portfolio is found somewhere which is below the efficient frontier, ideally you want to make sure that you're able to push it in such a way that it's now it will be found what somewhere. Ideally, your optimal portfolio should be found along the efficient frontier, because along the efficient frontier, this is where you're able to maximize your return for a given level of risk. So as you can see here, if you compare where the current portfolio is, you can see that if the portfolio was found along the efficient frontier, for the same amount of risk, this portfolio would be generating what? A higher level of return. So which means the idea behind the efficient frontier is that you want to be able to maximize your return for a given level of risk, and you want to minimize your risk for a given level of return as well. So that's basically the whole idea behind the efficient frontier and what you can, how it comes in when it comes to the issue of the efficient frontier as well. So looking at this, it would mean ideally how you would answer this question. Remember, the question is the first question I was asking us to look at to explain how the enterprise can use and apply the efficient frontier to risk taking to develop a risk portfolio of use when developing risk appetite and tolerance statements as well, right? So which means and how will the risk appetite of the enterprise influence risk financing decisions as well? So which means how you would ideally answer this question is you can choose to draw this diagram, which shows you the different relationship between risk and return. And then you can now to demonstrate the relationship between risk and return as well. It basically means that you can now be able to indicate that, for example, if you're comparing portfolio A and portfolio C, you will see that for the same amount of return, portfolio A is exposed to what? To lower risk. So ideally, you want to be able to invest in portfolio A, because for the same amount of return, portfolio A is exposed to lower risk. And if you compare portfolio B and portfolio C as well, you will see that for the same amount of risk, you would ideally want to find a software where your portfolio is on point B, because at point B, for the same amount of risk, you're able to maximize your returns as well. Then if you're comparing portfolio A and B, this is where you're now looking at the effects of risk appetite, to say if you have a low risk appetite, it means you invest in portfolio A, but at the same time, you must be prepared to get a lower return. And if you have a higher risk appetite, then you can invest in portfolio B, but at the same time, you should know that if the higher expected return is also accompanied by a higher risk on the overall portfolio as well. So here they say the efficient fund shows the relation between the risk as measured by the standard deviation and the return. So the goal is to maximize your benefits and minimize your cost and risk as well. So hence the aim is to minimize the cost and risk and maximize the benefits. So therefore, the aim is to maximize the return for a given level of risk or to minimize the risk for a given level of return. So a portfolio which can achieve the above is found on the efficient frontier. So in the above diagram, when comparing portfolio A and C, would choose A as it has the minimum risk for the same amount of return. Then if you compare portfolio B and C, would choose B as it has the maximum return for the same amount of risk. Then both portfolio A and B are found along the efficient frontier. So the choice between the two portfolios is dependent on the risk appetite of the enterprise. If the enterprise has a low risk tolerance, would choose portfolio A. But however, if the enterprise has higher risk appetite, it would choose portfolio B. So which means the points that you're going to be now alluding when you're discussing the first part of the question 2 there is basically coming from these are the things that you need to be able to highlight and allude to, and you need to just expand on them and discuss them a bit further as well. So are we on the same page when it comes to the first part of question 2? Any questions? All right, moving on to the second part of question 2. Remember, they also say, how will the risk appetite of the enterprise influence risk financing decision? So from here, you would say capital budgeting decisions, including the cost of capital, in order to maximize shareholders' wealth, management need to minimize the cost of capital as indicated by the weighted average cost of capital. So capital structure decisions, these are, when it comes to capital structure decisions, these in turn affect the capital structure as it increase in debt financing up to an optimum level is expected to lower the weighted average cost of capital and maximize the value of the firm, reflecting shareholders' wealth. However, an increase in debt will also increase the risk, financial risk of the firm. So therefore, risk and capital budgeting decisions are integrated as the capital budgeting decision with the highest return may exceed the risk appetite and philosophy of the enterprise as well. So that's basically how you can be able to explain further when it comes to the issue of risk and return, especially when it comes to the risk appetite of the enterprise as well. So this ideally how you would be able to address the second part of question 2 as well. Are there any questions?
Can you please simplify that answer? I don't think I'll be able to put it in my own ways, like to really understand how the risk affects.
So you find that when you look at capital budgeting decisions and risk appetite of the organization, you will see that the cost of debt is usually lower than the cost of equity. So in order to maximize the value of the firm, ideally, the firm also needs to minimize the cost of capital. So when the cost of capital goes down, the value of the firm goes up. That's why you see that many organizations, they try to minimize their costs as much as possible, because the more they're able to minimize their costs, the more they're able to maximize the value of the firm. Because remember, the reason why many business organizations try to minimize their costs as much as possible is mainly because they want to be able to maximize the value of the firm, because that's basically the goal of the firm. So for them to be able to do that, it basically means that they can now consider utilizing more debt financing, because the cost of debt is usually lower than the cost of equity. So which means that the more debt they utilize up to a certain optimum level, the more they're able to maximize the value of the firm. But we also know that the more debt financing a particular organization is using, the more the financial risk. Because remember, debt, we saw that in the others article, I think it was study unit 3, where we saw that when it comes to using debt financing, there are advantages to using debt. There are also disadvantages to using debt as well. So we know that the advantage of using debt is that it's seen as a positive signal by investors. It's also seen by investors it's also the use of debt, because debt is relatively lower than the cost of equity as well. It basically means that the more debt you're utilizing, the more you're able to maximize the value of the firm. But at the same time, we know that use of debt comes with also its own associated disadvantages as well. And one of those is that the more debt financing you're utilizing, the more the risk that the enterprise might not be able to service its obligations. Because remember, debt comes with fixed obligations, where they have to repay the debt when it reaches maturity. They also have to pay those interest obligations as well. So because of this, it basically means that the more debt a particular organization utilizes, the more the financial risk that it's also going to be facing as well. So the more debt an organization is using, the more the higher the financial risk that the organization is going to be facing as well. So because of this, it basically means that now the problem now of trying to maximize the value of the firm by where you are now utilizing debt as well, is that at some point the financial risk that the firm is going to be exposed to might be more than the ideal risk appetite of the organization. So which means that there now has to be there has to be that optimum level where you are able to mitigate and not exceed the risk appetite of the organization, but at the same time, you are trying to pursue a strategy where you're able to maximize the value of the firm as well. Because remember, debt also comes on its own disadvantages as well. So that's the idea. So you are looking at utilizing, trying to maximize the value of the firm. And in maximizing the value of the firm, you're also looking at utilizing of debt financing. But at the same time, we know that use of debt also comes with a higher risk as well, financial risk for the organization as well. So which means you need to make sure that you're able to not exceed the ideal risk appetite of the overall organization as well. Are we on the same page?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions? All right. Let's move on to question 3. Question 3 looks at they say distinguish between unfunded and funded risk retention. So they ask us to distinguish between unfunded and funded risk retention. And you get your answer there from Study Unit 11, Section 11.3. So you get your answer from Study Unit 11, Section 11.3. And under this section, they look at risk retention strategies. And here they say there are a number of risk retention strategies available to the enterprise, which can be divided into funded and unfunded risk retention. So unfunded risk retention, unfunded retained risk is a risk. A risk is retained and unfunded when no specific provision is made for the financial consequence of the loss. So unfunded retained risk can be divided into two broad categories: risk that is that is insurable but retained, and risk that is but uninsurable. So risks that are insurable but retained are normally the high frequency, low severity losses. For example, each and every excess on motor losses. So risk managers may decide not to make provision for these excesses, but to rather fund them out of the operational expenses of the enterprise. So risks that are uninsurable would include speculative risks that are usually purely financial in nature as well. Then there's also funded retained risk, where they say where an enterprise is in a position to fairly accurately predict certain losses and estimate their annual cost, an amount can be paid into a fund, and in this way, predicted losses can be economically retained. So the fund represents a form of pre-loss financing into which contributions are paid and from which withdrawals are made following a loss. So this is known as a funded risk retention. So this is where, so this section is where they discuss the unfunded retained risk and funded retained risk as well. So this is where it's all coming from. So remember, unfunded retained risk, you need to be able to explain that it's also divided into two main subcategories: risk that is insurable but retained, and risk that is what? Uninsurable. Then there's also funded retained risk, and this is where you're creating a particular investment account. Now, from that particular investment account, you're basically saying that in case of a loss event, I'm going to be utilizing that. I'm going to be utilizing the investment account or whatever reserve that I've created there to be able to actually to cover for those losses as well. So is there any question regarding unfunded and funded retained risk?
Yes, Rhinos. Does this mean that funded retained risk is or can be insurable and uninsurable as well?
The funded retained risk, yes. It can, because remember, broadly speaking, risk, remember we said that broadly speaking, there are two options that you so when it comes to risk, there are two options. It's either you transfer the risk or you retain the risk, right? So it's either you so when it comes to risk, it's either you transfer the risk or you retain the risk. So now if you retain the risk, this is where now we're basically saying that, so if you're going to be retaining the risk, what are the different options that you have? So it's either it's going to be funded or unfunded. And if it's unfunded as well, these risks that are unfunded, they can either risks that are basically, it's either risks that are insurable but retained, or these risks, they can be what? Uninsurable as well. So if it's unfunded, they can either be risks that are insurable but retained, or they can be uninsurable as well. And the same applies to funded retained risk as well. Remember, these risks that are discussed, saying that you are funding them, it can be because they are uninsurable, or they can be insurable as well. Because remember, the idea is that you're just choosing to retain them, whether it's out of your own willing or out of your own willingness to retain them, because although there's available insurance products available, or it's out of what it's not necessarily out of your control because there's no insurance products available, or what it cannot be insurable as well. So this is when you can create a fund towards that as well.
Noted. Thank you, Ernest.
Right. Okay. So the main broad thing is that either you can transfer the risk or you can retain the risk. But remember, you also have the products that can also that are also found in between. Like for example, if you are now choosing to have access on your insurance, basically means that you're not purely transferring the risk, you're not purely retaining the risk. You're basically finding yourself somewhere in between there as well. Are there any questions? Any questions? On the next question, they say one of the risk retention strategies is to establish a capital company. Discuss the criteria that can be considered to establish or join a captive program. So when it comes to the criteria that is established to establish or to join a captive program, it's coming from Unit 14. It's coming from Unit 14. Okay. So when it comes to the criteria that can be, remember there's that additional study guide that I also posted on the Google Drive. Under this section, they say who should consider a captive, and under that they say there are a few variables or prospective captive owner should analyze when evaluating the feasibility of a captive program. The first one is the premium size. And here they say, while there are specialized captive structures that may provide interesting benefits for smaller programs, in order to overcome the startup costs and ongoing operating expenses, most captive programs will require annual premiums of $1 million or more. So which means here, we're basically saying that you need to check your affordability to say, is the organization in a position to meet the required amount of premiums that are needed for the captive program to be viable? So you look at the company's ability or financial ability to meet the required amount that are needed on an annual basis to meet the premiums that are needed for the captive program. So this is where you look at the premium size. Then we look at good historical loss experience. And here they say, an insured with a good historical loss experience who is experiencing premium increases resulting from a commercial insurance market cycles is an ideal candidate for what? For captive program. So which means in this case, the captive program is ideal for when the enterprise has a low loss historical loss experience, because you don't want a situation where they have a high loss experience where if they create that particular captive, in no time they're going to be needing to what? To take out money from the captive as well, so that they're able to what? To cover. They are going to be making claims against the captive that they've created, and that way it might end up creating a situation where the captive might now end up running out of what? Out of capital for them to be able to what? To continue as a going concern as well. So in the company or the parent company itself needs to be having a good historical loss experience. Then the next one is commercial market availability. And here they say lines of insurance or industries that have become disfavored by the commercial market are good candidates for captive insurers. So disfavored industries such as medical malpractice insurance in recent years suffer from a supply and demand misbalance and are typically overcharged and not provided the amount of insurance required to properly operate the business. So a captive can help bring back the balance. Then the other one would be a risk retention appetite. And here they say, while captives are real insurance companies, at the end of the day, they are really a formalized form of self-insurance, especially in the case of a single parent captive. So adverse results at the captive level will negatively impact the results of its parent. So therefore, if your organization is risk averse, a captive may not be right for you. So which means it also goes back to the risk appetite of the organization as well. So if the organization is prepared to take on the risk that the captive might not be able to have the capacity to mitigate the losses when the loss event do happen as well, it basically means that they can now rather choose to go the commercial insurance route as well. Next, we look at dedicated project leaders. And here they say a captive is a complex entity subject to accounting, tax, and regulatory guidelines that may be unfamiliar to the organization considering the captive. So while a captive might make sense, many captive projects will not get off the ground or evolve without the presence of a dedicated project leader within the prospective captive owners organizations. So this project leader should have senior management credibility as well, because remember, they need to be able to have the right skills and requirements as well for them to be able to start off and make the captive start off and be able to start operating as well. So these are the factors that needs to be taken into account to assess to see if it's viable for the organization to create its own captive as well. Are there any questions? Are there any questions? Yes.
Hi, Reynolds. Could you please remind me this article is related to which unit?
It's coming from unit 14, right? It's coming from unit 14. If you check in your new study guide, it's not necessarily given in the new study guide, because previously it was in the lecturer put it in the study guide, but for some reason, the lecturer did not put it in the study guide. He's just making a reference to say available on my UNISA. So he's saying that it's available somewhere on my UNISA there. So previously the lecturer had put it in the study guide. So what I did is that I shared the study guide of I shared the study guide of I shared the previous study guide that we're using previously. So if you check in the previous study guide that I shared as well, you will see that it's also the under topic 4 as well, but it's the study guide that I labeled old study guide.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, but the article is on UNISA itself. I've checked it.
Is it? Okay. Are there any questions? All right, can we take a 10 minutes break until 9:30? Then at 9:30, we look at question 5, then move on to question 6 as well. So can we take a 10-minute break until 9:30? Can we continue? We are now looking at question 5. And for question 5, they give us that information. So they say, explain the concept of alternative risk transfer market and use a diagram to provide an overview of the alternative risk transfer products. So the overview of alternative risk transfer products is given on unit 22.3. So on unit 22.3, this is where you find the overview of the alternative risk transfer products. So before we go there, to discuss alternative risk transfer, we would say so we would say this is a broad term covering all forms of risk transfer, including those that provide substantial amounts of risk transfer and do not fall into the conventional insurance market definition, but include at least an element of insurance risk. So the main distinguishing features of alternative risk transfer markets are they are tailor-made solutions, they are multi-year policies, they often cover risks that are conventional that a conventional market would regard as uninsurable. They often contain some form of risk transfer of non-insurance risk, and inter alia provide risk funding solutions such as self-insurance as well. So those are some of the elements that they also carry as well. So if you check on unit 22.3, this is where you also find the diagram that also illustrates some of the products that are available under alternative risk transfer. So which means under this, you also find risk pools and insurers. And in this case, you find self-insurance plans, the captive insurance companies, and risk retention groups as well. Then you also find hybrid products, and under hybrid product this is where you find finite reinsurance, multi-year products, multi-peril products, multiple trigger products, and industry loss warranties, and also sidecars as well. Then you also find financial instruments such as contingent capital, options, swaps, and catastrophe bonds as well. So remember, the second part of the question was just asking you to highlight some of the products that are also found under the alternative risk transfer umbrella as well. So that's basically what you were expected to allude to. So is there any question? So you find this article in unit 22.3. So you find it under unit 22.3 of the study guide. Now we can move on to question 6. And for question 6, they were asking us they give us this case study. So they give us this particular case study. And under this case study, they say it is clear from the case study that power outages had an adverse effect on the production of ACME in 2019. So evaluate 2 alternatives as stated in the case study and make recommendations to the board regarding the most appropriate alternative or combination to ensure business continuation. Your answer should include the following: the alternative instruments, the characteristics of the solution, the total cost per solution, and the expected advantage or disadvantage of the solution, and also the recommendations as well. And they say you can ignore tax and depreciation for the purpose of calculation as well. So they give us this case study. Can you quickly go through the case study and we'll go through it together? So in this case, we are told that they need they had to generate their own electricity for 13.5 megawatts, of which they were only able to generate 6.5 megawatts. And because of this, they had an estimated loss of production due to the shortages, which amounted to 12 million. And then so ideally, under normal circumstances, they would be getting the electricity from the national grid at a cost of 1,550,000 per megawatt hour. But then if they utilize the diesel generators, they are able to get the electricity at a cost of 2,250,000 per megawatt hour. And if there's also another alternative as well, where they have a core option on getting supply electricity from another company, Raw Diamond. But for them to have the right but no obligation to buy the electricity from Raw Diamond, they need to pay a premium of 1% of the strike price. And in this case, the strike price is equals to 1.8 million per megawatt hour. So in this case, they also tell us that it also means that even if they only need half a megawatt, they still need to, or they are going to be liable for the full amount as well. So even if they need half a megawatt, they are still going to be liable for the full amount as well. So we need to make sure that we take note of that. And in this case, we now need to assess to see exactly, so which alternative would be better for them to use diesel generators or for them to have this core option on electricity from another supplier as well. So that's basically, these are the two alternatives that we need to assess against getting the electricity from from the national grid as well. So to answer this question, we would say if we choose the diesel generation route, if we choose the diesel generation route, it would mean, remember, currently, although we need to be able to generate, we need to be able to generate 13.5 megawatt hours, we are only currently able to generate what? 6.5 megawatt hours as well, right? So which means in this case, we're going to say from current capacity, so from current capacity, we need 6.5 megawatt hours at a cost of 2,550,000 per megawatt hour, right? So we need 6.5 megawatt hours at a cost of 2,550,000 per megawatt hour. So how much is going to be the current cost of to generate the 6.5 megawatts that we're able to generate? So if you say 6.5 times 2,550,000, how much do you get?
Sorry, Reynolds, the 6.5, isn't we are getting from the grid?
No. We are going to, remember we're saying, so the idea here is we're trying to check to see exactly, so how much additional cost are we going to end up incurring if we get the electricity from the national, if we get the electricity using the diesel generators compared to getting the electricity from the national grid. Then we're going to compare that additional cost that we're incurring compared to if we have a co-option on electricity supply from another supplier as well. How much is that additional cost that we're going to be incurring compared to getting the electricity from the national grid as well?
Okay, thanks.
Okay. How much is that going to be?
16,575,000.
So it will be 16,575,000. Then there's also going to be an additional cost, because remember, our aim is to get this electricity from our aim is to generate what? 13.5 megawatt hours, isn't it? So which means if we are aiming to generate 13.5 megawatt hours and we are only currently able to generate 6.5, it means that with the diesel generators there, we will have another 7 megawatt hours that we need to be able to generate as well. At a cost of how much? 2,550,000. So how much is the additional cost that we also need to be able to incur?
Sorry, Reynolds, are you
Mhm.
not using the wrong? Okay, this capacity of 2550, where did you get that from?
If we utilize diesel generators, how much is the cost that we're going to be incurring?
250.
Oh, it's 250. Okay, sorry.
Yeah,
I
that's
need, okay. It's 2,250,000. Okay. So how much is going to be the cost?
14,625,000.
14,625,000. And the other one?
15,750,000.
15,750,000. So how much is the total cost if we use the diesel generators?
$30,375,000.
So it will be 20,375,000. 30.
30, yeah.
375,000. All right. Then the cost from the national grid. If we get this electricity from the national grid, remember they tell us that if we get the electricity from the national grid, per megawatt hour, we are going to be charged an amount of 1,550,000, isn't it? So it means for per megawatt hour, we're being charged 1,550,000. And remember, we need how much in total? 13.5 megawatt hours at a cost of 1,550,000. So how much would that be? If we're getting all the electricity from the national grid, how much would be the cost there?
$20,925,000.
20,925. So if we get the electricity from diesel generators, the additional costs that are going to be incurred in this case is going to be how much? So how much would be the additional cost?
$9,425,000.
94?
9,425,000.
Is it not 9,450,000? Because it's 3375 minus 2925.
Yeah, that's correct.
So it's 9,450,000. So if we use the diesel generators there, we're expecting to incur an additional cost of 9,450,000. So we need to find out exactly. So if we choose not to implement the diesel generators option or alternative, what would be the opportunity cost of not implementing this strategy as well? So we see that if you check on the question, they told us that we had an estimated loss of production due to electricity shortage, which was equal to 12 million, right? So we had an estimated loss of production which was equal to 12 million. Which was equal to 12 million. Then from there, we see that the total additional cost from diesel generators was equal to 9,450,000. So the difference between these two would give us the opportunity cost of not implementing the diesel generators alternative. So this would give us the opportunity cost and how much is the opportunity cost in this case?
$3,450,000.
3.
Yes.
Is it 3 million?
Oh, sorry. Sorry, it's 2,650,000.
2,650,000.
2,650,000.
Eh? It's 12 million minus 9,450,000.
Yes, 2,650,000.
550, not 650. It's 12 million minus 9,450,000.
Reynolds, with regards to the rate that you use to calculate the current capacity of 6.5, the question says they managed to generate 6.5, but how do you know how much, which rates to use for calculating? Because to me, it's not clear. If I was answering this question, I was not even going to take this into consideration because 6.5 to me is a sunk cost. It has been incurred. So for deciding on the relevant option going forward, I would take out 6.5 because it has been incurred.
Yes, but remember, we are trying to make an assessment not based on what has happened in the past, but we're trying to make an assessment going into the future, right? So in the future, let's say, for example, in the following year, if we end up needing to generate electricity for a given period of time, they are basically saying that we need to be able to generate 13.5 megawatt hours, isn't it? Are we on the same page there?
Okay.
So which means
I
going into the future, if we need to generate 13.5 megawatt hours, we see that the current capacity that we have, we are able to generate how much? We were able to generate only 6.5 megawatt hours currently, but we will still need an additional 7 megawatt hours as well for us to now be able to reach the full 13.5 megawatt hours. But if it so happens that we rely only on diesel generators for the electricity that we need, so we need to find out exactly how much is the additional cost that we're going to be carrying compared to getting that electricity from the what? From the national grid. So we're trying to make an estimate going to the future based on our electricity needs. We know that so in some cases we would have just said the cost of the diesel generation, you could have just said 13.5 multiplied by 250,000. Because remember, this is how much, if it so happens that for the full period, you need 13.5 megawatt hours, it basically means that how much is it going to cost you if you go there to the generators compared to if you're getting direct electricity from the national grid. Because remember, going to the future, we don't know how much electricity shortages we're going to end up experiencing as well. So we're assuming that if it's the full amount that we're going to experience the shortage on, how much is the additional cost that we're going to incur?
Oh, okay. Yes,
Okay.
I understand. Yes, understand if you're saying we are assuming we are going to need the full capacity.
13.5, the full capacity for us to be able to meet our needs of 13.5 megawatt hours. Yes.
All right. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Sorry, Reynolds. On the same topic, if it's we are checking of what's going to happen in the future, so why don't we use the raw diamond electricity, which costs less than the generator?
How do we know it costs less?
Because they gave us an estimation, 1.8, isn't it?
Yes, but
Or
now,
did I read?
So remember now, you as the risk manager, you need to demonstrate to the board as well to say, this, if it's going to cost us less, this is why we're saying that it's going to cost us less. And that's why we're doing the estimation. Because remember, for us, you need to be able to demonstrate, if you're saying that the option on getting the electricity from another supplier as well is going to cost us less, you need to show them in numbers that this is why we're saying that it's going to cost us less. And that's what we're doing. So we are now demonstrating to say, this is how much it's going to cost us if we go the diesel generator route. Then we now need to also show this is how much it's going to cost us if we go the core option route as well. So we're going to come to that and do the calculation and see how much it's going to cost us as well. Are we on the same page? Are there any other questions? Now, let's look at the other alternative. The other alternative is to have a core option on electricity supply from raw diamond, isn't it? So that's the other alternative as well. So for that, they give us that information. So for that alternative, on the question, they give us that information. So they tell us that we need to pay a premium, which is equals 1% of the strike price. And the strike price in this case is the price that we're going to be getting the electricity from, that we have the right but no obligation to buy the electricity at this particular price per megawatt hour as well. And then they also tell us that the duration of the option will be for 6 months at a time, and will be exercise will be able to exercise a portion, for example, 500 kilowatt hours, which is basically half of that, will still be responsible for the full premium as well. So the reason why this statement is there is because we see that we need 13.5 megawatt hours. So which means from the 13.5 megawatt hours there, for the full 13 megawatt hours, we are paying a premium, which is equal to 1% of the exercise price. But then for the 0.5 additional megawatt hour that we need as well, we are not paying half the premium. We're going to pay what? The premium, the full amount of the premium as well. So we have to make sure that we account for this as well, where we're saying we're paying the full for the full premium, even if we need only half of a megawatt hour as well. So because of this, it basically means that we're going to say, to make the assessment, we're going to say, so because of this, it means we're going to say the premium is going to be equal to 1% of the excise price, which is equal to 1.8 billion. And how much is going to be the premium? How much is the premium?
$18,000.
80,000. So the premium is going to be equal to 18,000. Then from the national grid, remember, from the excise price is 1.8 million, but if we get the electricity from the national grid, it's going to cost us how much? 1,550,000, isn't it? So which means we're going to say the exercise price is equal to 1.8 million. From the national grid, we are able to get the electricity at 1,550,000. So how much is the additional cost? How much is going to be the additional cost in this case?
$250,000.
How much?
250,000.
So the additional cost in this case is going to be 250,000, right? So now we need to find out exactly if it's going to cost us an additional 250,000 to get 1 megawatt hour. We now need to find out exactly if we need the 13.5 megawatt hours, how much is it going to cost us as well in addition as well, right? So which means we're going to say, remember we saw that even if you need half a megawatt hour, you are still going to be liable for the full premium as well, right? So which means for the 13 megawatt hours, the cost that we're going to be incurring is going to be equal to, so for the 13 megawatt hours, the cost that are going to incur is equals to, we see that the additional cost is 250,000. And for 1 megawatt hour, we are going to pay a premium of how much? 18,000. So this is now going to be multiplied by 13, because remember, we're accessing what? We need 13 megawatt hours there as well. So in this case, how much is going to be the total additional cost for the 13 megawatt hours?
It's going to be 3,484,000.
3,484,000. Then for the other 0.5 megawatt hour, it's going to cost us. So for the other 0.5 megawatt hours, we're going to pay a full premium of 18,000. So we're going to pay a full premium of what? 18,000. But now for the 0.5 megawatt hours that we need, it means that the additional cost is going to be equal to what? Is going to be equal to half of the amount that we're going to end up incurring that in that case as well, right? So which means in this case, it's going to be okay. This question was brought in an assignment. Then it was also brought in the exam as well. So you see that in the answer that the lecturer presented in the assignment, we didn't really get a clear answer on why on the reasoning that the lecturer was using to account for the additional 0.5 megawatt hours as well. Because if you look at the 13 megawatt hours, it basically means that this split the costs were coming from two sources there, right? There is the cost of the premium for the 13 megawatt hours, and then there's a cost for the additional cost of electricity for the 13 megawatt hours as well. So this calculation is basically split into two. Now, when it comes to the 0.5 megawatt hours, what the lecturer did is, I'm in agreement, the full 18,000 needs to be accounted for, because even if you need half the capacity, you're going to pay the full premium. But now what the lecturer did is that on the memo, the lecturer now said the 1.8 million, which is the cost of getting the electricity from the supplier, multiplied by 0.5. So that's basically how we accounted for the other 0.5 megawatt hours. And if you say 1.8 times 0.5 gives you 900,000. Then if it's 900,000 plus the cost of the premium, which is 18,000, it would give you, what the lecturer did is that it gave us a total cost which was equals to 918,000 in that case. So that's what the lecturer did. The reasoning behind that, I am not 100% sure. You might need to just clarify from the lecturer regarding that, because if it's an additional cost that you're going to be incurring, I would have thought that you would have multiplied the 0.5 megawatt hours to see exactly how much is the additional cost that you're going to be incurring. So if for every megawatt hour, if you're going to incur an additional cost of 250,000, you would think that if it's half a megawatt hour, it means you're going to incur an additional cost, which is going to be equal to what? Half that as well. But he accounted for the full 1.8 million in the calculation that he did on the assignment as well. So I'm still to get a bit of clarity on exactly the reasoning that the lecturer was using to account for the extra half the megawatt hour. So I'm in agreement with him. The premium of 18,000 needs to be accounted for, because even if you need half a megawatt hour, you're going to pay the full premium for you to have the right but no obligation. But now, when it comes to the additional cost being equal to 1.8 million, I'm not sure exactly what this means that the lecturer was using. Maybe there's something that I'm struggling to wrap my head around, but that's the reasoning that he used. He accounted for the full 1.8 million and multiplied that by half the times half megawatt hour to see how much the cost is going to be equal to as well. Are we on the same page? So in this case, the total cost to implement this would be equal to the sum of these two amounts. And if you add up these two amounts, how much do you get? So if you add up those two amounts, how much do you get?
4,402,000.
4,402,000. So it would be 4,402,000. So the additional cost would be 4,402,000. So now remember, they say that if ever we're going to be implementing this strategy, so if ever we're going to be implementing this strategy, we now need to compare that with the estimated loss of production that we saw that in the previous years, the loss of production was equal to what? 12 million. So it would mean we see that the estimated loss of production was 12 million. And we have a total additional cost to implement so the total additional cost for the core option, which is equals to 4,402,000. So this will give us the opportunity cost of not implementing the alternative. So this will give us the opportunity cost and how much is the opportunity cost of not implementing this particular alternative?
$16,402.
16. You are looking at the difference between the two, eh? You are looking at the difference between the two.
$7,598,000.
7 million.
598,000.
So we saw that diesel generator, so choosing the diesel generator alternative had an opportunity cost of not implementing, which was equal to 2,550,000. And the core option on electricity is an opportunity cost of not implementing, which is equal to 7,598,000. So the alternative that you're going to be choosing is the one with the highest opportunity cost of not implementing. So the alternative that you're going to choose there is the one with the highest opportunity cost of not implementing. So in this case, we go the core option on electricity alternative. So we will choose the core option on electricity option as alternative, sorry, because it is the one with the highest opportunity cost of not implementing the alternative. Are we on the same page? Now, looking at the two alternatives. So looking at the two alternatives, we also need to look at the advantages of, sorry, we need to look at the potential advantages and disadvantages of utilizing those two alternatives as well. So when it comes to the diesel generating capacity, we see that the advantage of going the diesel generating route there is that we already have the equipment in place to go the diesel generating route, and we have some sort of control on the on diesel generation as well. Although we might, then the disadvantage there is that we might not have control on the price of the cost of diesel generation before, because remember, if the cost of of diesel goes up, it means this alternative becomes even way much more expensive as well. And we don't have an arrangement to fix the price at which we're going to be buying the diesel as well. When you look at the core option on the supply of electricity, the advantage that we have is that if from the assessment that we've done there, it's the cheaper option, and it's the cheaper alternative. And we see that the alternative gives us the right but no obligation, which basically means if we see that the alternative is not going to be advantageous to us in the future as well, we can be able to walk away from the arrangement as well. But the disadvantage is that we do not have control over what happens with the supply of electricity, because if they also have their own technical difficulties there, it basically means that when we exercise that right, they might not be able to deliver when we exercise our right as well. So those are some of the things that you now need to highlight when you are looking at the advantages and disadvantages of both alternatives as well. Are there any questions?
Yeah. What is your advice when you are in an exam? When we get like a case study, because I've noticed that most of the case studies, for me, as an individual, they're quite complicated, and you'll be constrained of time when you're in the exam. How would you advise us to approach this case study? Because sometimes it just gets confusing because of the time, and you need to understand what's happening.
Okay, my advice would be read the question first. So my advice would be read the question first, understand the question. Then when you go through the case study, you are now only so you need to read the question first and understand the question, so that when you go through the case study, you are now going to be highlighting the relevant information that you need for you to be able to answer the question. So you find that in most cases, some of these case studies that you see that the lecturer brings in the exams, a lot of the information there is not necessarily relevant for you to use to answer the question. So my advice would be read the question first, understand exactly what the question is asking you to do. Then when you go through the case study, highlight the things that you feel they are relevant to the question that has been asked as well. So that way it makes it a lot easier for you to now be able to consolidate the information that you need to answer the question as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, by Monday, I'm going to share, I'm going to upload the video. Then I'll also share the memo so that you also have a look at the memo as well. And please make sure that you review the memo, especially the question that we've gone on, question number 1 as well. That question is it's still very relevant from a practical perspective as well. So try as much as possible to just think of points that you can also look at for question number 1 from an exam perspective, to say if this question comes again, how would you approach this question in answering the question as well? And also using practical examples of things that we're seeing thus far as well when it comes to the issue of the pandemic and the cascading effects that are also resulting from the effect of the pandemic as well. Are there any questions? So in the next class, we are going to look at the May-June 2020 paper. So in the next class, we're going to look at the May-June 2020 paper as well. Please try to follow up on issues that I've highlighted regarding the assignment and also regarding that question, section on business interruption as well. Because yeah, there's quite a bit of issues that needs to be addressed and ironed out there. So please try as much as possible to follow up on those so that we make sure that by the time, at least by the time we get to Christmas, we are on the same page roughly with the lecturer, so that whatever the lecturer says that we need to be able to, or how we should approach those questions is exactly how we need to approach those questions. But we need to make sure that we ask as many questions as possible so that our thinking is aligned with how the lecturer is also thinking, or how the question should be approached as well.
Ranus, for me, the lecturer is not responding to my emails. I don't know if anyone else is experiencing it. Or should I keep on sending emails?
All right, let's hope the lecturer responds before we break for Christmas. Let's just hope that the lecturer responds before we break for Christmas, so that we know that during the Christmas period, we're also aligning ourselves to be in the same mindset as the lecturer on how answers to approach these questions as well. So yeah, so let's just hope the lecturer responds before we break for Christmas. Yeah. All right, are there any other questions? If not, then yeah, I will try find another way of trying to see exactly, ideally, how would you approach these questions as well, so that at least we are answering the questions according to what the lecturer is requiring us to do as well. All right, if there are no questions, enjoy the rest of your day.
Rhinos.
Yes.
You promised the previous year's recordings for revision classes. I don't know when are you going to upload them.
All right, I'll upload the 2020 papers, but the 2019 papers, I'm going to hold back because I need you guys to attempt those questions first. Then I'll make because remember, the idea is the 2019 papers, you need to go over them over the Christmas period as well. So I'll upload them. The 2019 papers, the video, I'll upload them, say, around just before Christmas, but I'll be hoping that you guys would have at least tried to attempt the 2019 papers as well, so that when I upload the videos, you would have tried to attempt the questions, and then you'll be now you'll be going to be going over the video and or going over the memo as well. So
the syllabus. When did the syllabus start here? Is it 2018 or 2019? So that we can go through those papers.
Yeah, I think it's 2018. Yeah, it should be 2018. So you see that there are the previous years as well. There are some questions which are still relevant, but yeah, you have to be very cautious when you go through those ones, because you don't want to be going through concepts which are not necessarily discussed in the news, in the study guide as well. All right, enjoy the rest of the day.